My name's Steve Melton. I'm an artist or sculptor. I was born and raised in a very rural location on the peaks in South Yorkshire. I was raised alongside nature, walking the fields and appreciating nature in all its diversity. I used to breed birds, and I once saved an owl and raised it and then let it go into the countryside. So I've always had a close connection to wildlife and nature, and that kind of feeds through into my art, where I express deep concerns about how we're conducting ourselves as a species, and sensible custodianship, and the complexities that arrive when you start talking about our relationship to nature. And quite often I deal with difficult subjects that people find uncomfortable, but I personally feel that great art kind of reflects periods that the artist lived in, and those are the issues that are most pressing to me. So that's the subject matter for a lot of what I do. I was raised in a family of makers, and if we wanted something, we couldn't afford it, so we ended up making it. And I spent a lot of my childhood watching my father, who was a very qualified engineer, and my grandfather, who also a very qualified individual, making a steam train. So I was raised in that creative kind of environment. I never made a conscious decision that I wanted to be an artist. I just started carving wood as a child, and then that went through to my school and college, where I did my degree at Camberwell and the Royal College after that. And then I travelled the world a bit, where I studied kiln making in Sri Lanka and Japan, and casting techniques as far and wide as the Sahara with the Tuareg. Since I've been running my own businesses since the 80s, running my own creative sort of businesses where I produce work for other people, as well as allowing myself to have the access to all the machines and tools and materials that I need as an artist to do my own work. Quite often I'm asked to produce work within Spacer, to cast and produce work for other artists, where I use my skills and abilities to manifest whatever they wish. I was trained at the Royal in foundry work because I wanted that independence to do my own work without technical constraint. And that fed through into sort of building a business and career for myself as a producer of art for other people, as well as producing work for myself. Often I employ some of the skills that I learned at college, working with the human figure, and sometimes I'm commissioned to produce figurative sculpture for other people. Whereas I did the King and Queen Ethelbert and Bertha in Canterbury, which was fascinating because obviously that allowed me to sort of learn about our own history. And recently I've just produced 7 life-sized bronze figures for the Battle of Britain Museum in Hawkinge, to celebrate and as a remembrance of the sacrifices that some of our pilots gave in the Second World War. The latest figure I've produced, 8 for the Battle of Britain Museum, is one of Paddy Hemingway, and he's the last remaining survivor of the Battle of Britain. And he's 104, I think, and he's presently living in Ireland. And I received a few photographs of what he looked like as a young man, and then asked to produce a life-sized sculpture of him. And I believe he's very happy with it, which is great. Now we're just casting it into bronze. So, you know, I kind of see the whole process from start to finish. In my studio, excuse the mess, but that's part of the creative process. But As you can see, there's a whole variety of work here from different periods, some of it quite old and some of it really quite new. In front of you, you can see a bronze wreath made out of dead exotic creatures. I decided I wanted to explore the world of the exotic pet trade, and I started by liaising with a local pet shop, and I asked them if they would provide me with any casualties of the pet trade. And unbeknown to me at the time, I didn't realise, but every month he'd turn up with about 3 or 4 sacks full of dead exotic creatures from all over the world. And I just found this so alarming, and I needed to sort of talk about that and share the horror of that, really. The wreath in front of you, there's about sort of 90 creatures there, and they're from all over the world. And according to the World Wildlife Trust, about 96% of exotic creatures die in the industry. 96% of them die, and it's also such a poorly regulated industry that whole ecosystems have been raped to acquire these exotic creatures so that people can have them as pets. And I just found that so alarming that I needed to sort of talk about that. And I chose a wreath. Our culture kind of, we use wreaths as sort of commemorative objects. Ancient cultures, the first wreath is Etruscan, apparently, and it's made out of gold, and that was an object of power and wealth and status. And throughout history, we've used wreaths for a whole variety of meanings. The Roman Empire, they used wreaths to represent moral virtue, and obviously, I'm choosing to sort of use it as a device or a message to extend the sort of horror that we're kind of imposing upon nature. I went through a period which was quite difficult for me. I was on social media quite a bit, and I was signing this worthy cause and that worthy cause, and the more worthy causes that you sign, the more worthy causes are sent to you, like saving the bees and so on. And every morning I was waking up and seeing all these horrific images online, all worthy causes that I wanted to sort of vote to stop. And it sent me down a spiral of anxiety, and I needed to sort of somehow offload that. So I kind of produced this piece, which is in the form of a carousel, and it's a broken carousel, and it's a sort of a symbolic of a nightmare that you can't actually get off. And upon it, I've laden lots of different messages from mass extinction to global warming to fossil fuels. As you start examining the smaller details, you then see, the Tahiti dolphin hunt and the Grindadad sort of Faroe Island slaughter, where animals are just slaughtered in under the excuse of tradition. And I want to sort of challenge that and hopefully encourage people to evolve out of that. It's topped with a flag with plastic written on it. That's a hot topic at the moment. It's sort of our oceans are filled with plastics, and apparently we even have plastics in our lungs now because it's such fine material. It's becoming a part of us, and only knows what kind of repercussions are caused by this. Some of the details, as you sort of get quite close, it's sort of the closer you get, the more you see. And I've written in various text that I've highlighted in red gloss paint from shark fin soup, and it's a hot topic. We need to discuss things like that and the repercussions of killing all the sharks in the oceans and obliteration of species and killing for fun. People call it sport, but actually, sport is in my opinion, it's two parties voluntarily coming together to participate in something, and obviously just killing something for fun, I just find quite perverse, really. Pets at what cost? It reflects on the pet trade, and and the fact that you can just order an exotic snake from somewhere just by going online and participating in this sort of horrific pet trade. On the carousel, there's lots of skeletons, and each skeleton is of a specific species that is suffering, really, like the pangolin. We're obliterating the pangolins because of the Chinese medicine, and actually it's the same material that exists on the end of our fingers. It's sort of there's nothing special about pangolin scales. It's kind of like rhino horn. It's just this sort of myth that is perpetuated, and because of that kind of myth, whole species have been obliterated. Another piece that I did a wee while ago now was I was acknowledging, as the world was acknowledging, that bees were dying out en masse, and we called it hive collapse. And we didn't quite know what was causing this hive collapse at the time. All we knew that was bees were dying en masse globally. And I started collecting bees over a 12-month period between my studio and the local food shop, collecting them from the side of the road. And I then decided I wanted to immortalize them by encasing them in clear casting resin. From that, I then ended up making a kind of flask of genetic material where I'm celebrating all these different species of bees. I then decided to sort of encase that in almost like a Victorian style kind of mini museum or an object of curiosity. And I started collecting exotic timber from skips. And I kind of used that kind of Victorian aesthetic of, the mahogany cabinets that you can kind of open and explore the sort of beautiful things within. And within the cabinet, I've got this sort of clear casting flask full of different types of bees arranged in a kind of a genetic helix. When you open it up, there are mirrors behind the flask. So when light is projected onto it, the light goes all the way to the back and bounces. So it kind of makes the whole interior shine. One of the nice repercussions of encasing the bees in spheres is that it kind of magnifies them as well. So you can actually really see every hair of the bee. And if you're inclined, you can research the different species and so on. And as I say, these were just gathered from a small stretch of road between the studio and where I sometimes buy my lunch. And if you amplify that up, the UK alone, we're covered in miles and miles of roads. So obviously a lot of bees are killed by traffic. But since we've discovered, there's all kinds of things from chemicals. Scientists did an experiment on a bee and found, I forget the exact figure, but it was something like 15 foreign chemicals in the bee that it had clearly just gathered from the flowers in our countryside. So obviously, the repercussions of all this chemical sort of spraying in our agriculture. I believe every country in the world, because bees are distributed globally, every country in the world has now got a varroa mite, which is a parasitic bug that kind of attacks the bees. Or every country apart from Australia, because they don't import bees. It's safer if you want to buy honey to buy it from Australia, because if you buy it from elsewhere, it might contain various chemicals that is used to combat the varroa mite. That's quite an old piece, but still very poignant. I was asked to participate in a festival called Margate Rocks, and I was commissioned to produce a piece, and I decided to focus on the local marine ecology. And I started by liaising with the local fishermen to see what they were catching. And they then started providing me with various specimens and various species of fish that they were catching. The cod were diminishing, and the ray species were diminishing nationally. One day, a fisherman turned up with a thresher shark caught off Ramsgate, and that species shouldn't even be in our waters. Really, it's more of a hot water species, but because of global warming, it's now in our waters. They gave me the fish, and then I would take plaster waste molds from them, and then from the plaster waste molds, I'd then cast them into wax. And then I'd employ the lost wax process, where you submerge a wax in heat-resistant materials. Then you bake the wax away to form a cavity, and in the cavity you pour the metal. And on this occasion, it was bronze. I then started liaising with CFAS and DEFRA and talking to them about the sort of species and custodianship and what we were doing to try and preserve what we have. I decided that it was interesting enough to invite various peoples from these representatives from these organisations to attend a lecture where they were on stage, and I, as a concerned citizen, could ask them questions and encourage the public to ask them questions. The local fishermen were asking questions like, on what information are you making these laws? And CFAS and saying, well, we go out to sea and gather data. And the fishermen said, well, how often do you do that? And they said, well, we went out twice last year. And of course, the local fishermen fell around laughing. And then they agreed that if the fishermen were trained up, that they could then start gathering data on a daily basis for them. But it was ironic that it took an artist to get them together. We all know the plight of the local, the global sharks, with the shark fin soup, and the sort of killing of apex predators and the repercussions that has on ecosystems, and the downright cruelty of taking an animal and chopping it apart and then throwing it back alive. It's kind of it's immoral, and we should evolve and stop doing such practices. The piece I'm working on at the moment, it's still in a state of flux, but I produced a piece a while back where I was collecting exotic timber from skips, and I ended up carving a life-size orangutan skeleton and out of exotic timber from all over the world, and junk shops and materials that I was acquiring from junk shops was carvings of animals. So obviously people were going abroad and getting their souvenirs of carved elephants carved out of the local timbers, inadvertently sort of contributing to deforestation. We're probably all guilty of it, but it's sort of, we need to become more aware of that kind of thing. And so I had a collection of elephants, and I just wanted to do something with them. And we're all aware of the sort of forests burning globally, so I decided to put a blowtorch to them, and it kind of took away that kind of twee souvenir cute elephant and just sort of melted them into charcoal kind of impressions of elephants, which I've put in a wreath kind of scenario, or a bit like the sort of story in the Jungle Book where elephants are kind of dancing in a circle. The flowers that I'm creating to also decorate it are made out of an old plastic bucket. So I'm upcycling plastics now and thinking more about using this free material, which is a material that is so controversial at the moment. And from this plastic bucket, I'm creating little blue forget-me-nots. The title says it all, really. It's a flower used to commemorate. I just like the synthetic blue plastic and how it relates to the sort of more organic burnt timber. I think that combination is quite intriguing and probably something I'm going to explore a bit more in the future. As an artist, I do want to sort of reflect the times that we live, and some of the pressing issues that I feel are important to address. I do believe that the foundations of good conservation is education. So I produce my work, and I do have shows, and I'm in various publications and give lectures and so on. So it's sort of my attempt at doing something rather than nothing. I've had really good response from a whole variety of people who don't normally sort of pay attention to the repercussions of what they do, as well as sort of David Attenborough said he was aware of my work, and I took that as a great compliment. I think it's a time of reevaluation, really. I mean, we're all having to reevaluate what we do and what we buy and the products that we buy, and as people become more aware of global issues, they might start exploring what's in the food, and they might not want to buy that particular product because it's got palm oil in it. In doing that, at least you're doing something.